We are back with Norm's part 2 interview. If you missed part 1, you can go back and watch that before this one if you want.
The documentary that I mentioned earlier, you described being told that circumcision made you special and better. And I was wondering, what was the turning point when you began to question that narrative?
Well, as soon as I realized that I was damaged, I realized that that was not being special. That was not the gift, the Jewish gift to the medical profession to teach
Yeah,
circumcision. So that was all identitarian politics, that this idea that the Jews have to justify Judaism to the modern age, that somehow, in addition to the commandment given by God, it had to also have some medical benefit in order to validate it. And I despise that sort of hypocrisy, that if you're religious, that is the commandment, and that it needs no appendage to add to it anything about medical benefits. So the Orthodox Jews, they don't really care about the medical benefits. They might use it as a way to defend circumcision, but they're doing it because it's God's commandment. There's a narrative, and there always has been, of Jews as the chosen people, God's chosen people. So that plays out in various ways in the Jewish community, having a certain kind of status. I'm sure other ethnic groups have the same sort of fantasies that somehow they're better than the other groups. This is just natural human nature, but it does take a certain form that somehow this was either God's idea or this was Abraham's idea to do this for very valid reasons having to do with health, and that's just not true. And so it's painful to hear. Obviously, if you feel like this is your connection to the Jewish people, and that the Jewish people are have given so many good things to the world, which they have, that this is not a good thing. It's really painful to hear. But as I said, I was already an atheist, and I was not identifying as being Jewish. If people called on me because of my last name, they might say, "Oh, well, can you speak as a Jew?" And well, I might speak as a Jew, but in my heart, it's just like American Jew is a person who believes in the Jewish God. And if you don't believe in God in America as a Jewish American, you really can't count yourself as a Jew.
that must have been pretty shocking when you learned that circumcision actually predates Judaism. What did you think of that?
Well, yeah, that was one of the upsets to the narrative, right? That I was another thing I was taught in Sunday school is that, yeah, the Jews invented circumcision because obviously God was the one that told Abraham, according to the Bible, this mythical patriarch Abraham, that circumcision was the sign of the covenant, was the token of agreement between God and the Jewish people, that the Jewish people would inherit the land of Israel, and that this would be the sign of their agreement with their God. But no, they picked it up from the Egyptians. It was already well entrenched, at least 1,000 years before that alleged story of Abraham. It was already well entrenched in the Egyptian culture. It was forced upon slaves. It was also a initiation rite. It takes many forms, so we can't be with absolute certainty who was the very first circumciser and victim, but we know that it predates Judaism by at least 1,000 years.
In that documentary, you had also mentioned that you were angry not only about your own circumcision, but about the fact that it's still happening decades later. And I was wondering, has that anger evolved as you've aged? It's been about 30 years since that documentary.
Yeah, thankfully it has evolved. It still, influences my work that I do and how I present. But naturally, I had to temper it. I was in psychotherapy, and so I was able to address a lot of the other issues of my childhood and some other reasons why I was angry. And so I'm certainly tempered by it. Believe it or not, circumcision isn't the worst thing that can happen to a child. There's many other things that can happen. And so circumcision isn't the narrative for everything that has gone wrong in your life, or you can't blame all of your failed relationships and your anger on only on circumcision. I think that is a mistake. And that it's also a mistake to try and completely try and forget about it, that you have to integrate and accept that you were a victim of this mutilation, but that too has influenced you, not just in negative ways, but also in positive ways. There's my ability to bring the energy that I have now to the movement and to the work is part because I've been able to integrate my anger about circumcision with the rest of my life and with who I am as a man and what I believe about right and wrong, about making choices, about being responsible for your choices, about deciding what you are responsible for and what you're not, rather than to hold an endless grudge against circumcision and circumcisers. I see it as an opportunity to change the world, to end what is really a 6,000-year-old practice that we might be able to end in a few generations.
All it takes is just stop doing it. It's a shame that people just don't pick up on that, you know? In that documentary, you had emphasized that speaking out against circumcision is not anti-Semitic and that caring about babies isn't anti-Semitic. How often have you had to confront the accusation personally, and has it shaped your advocacy?
Yeah, it comes up, but as we know, there's a lot of Jews within the movement who are working against circumcision, who
Mhm.
are practicing Jews, who committed to Judaism and Jewish identity, and that's great. And sure, it's sort of a card that is thrown out against us, but it really doesn't stick when you have Jews who are actively Jewish choosing not to circumcise. I worry less and less about that now, but that is the narrative in Europe that is used when they do try to regulate or ban circumcision. They say, you're just a bunch of anti-Semites.
I believe Bruchim, which their main goal is to just get Jewish communities to be able to accept non-circumcising Jews. I believe there's Israeli Times article that even claimed that they were anti-Semitic.
I'm not sure of the article you're speaking of, but yeah,
Yeah,
that would be the narrative. The mainstream is instantly defensive
yeah.
against it. But when they claim to be the monitor of human rights or have an elevated status about social justice and that they're circumcising their sons, it has to be pointed out. It must be pointed out that this is hypocrisy.
So at the height of the original No Cert, did they actually have chapter in all 50 states?
Well, nearly every state. I know they had it in Puerto Rico, they had it in the Virgin Islands, they had it in
Really?
Guam. So, were these mostly figureheads? Probably a lot of it were just contact information. Maryland would send out, pamphlets for them to hand out and all that. But that was the beginning. That was the prototype of a model that unfortunately she destroyed. She canceled it. Your Whole Baby was supposed to pick up some of that, but it just never happened. So there is no local chapter model anymore. A lot of it became, well, how do we control these wild and crazy intactivists? We're going to lose control unless we rein them in, and we cut our ties, like what Maryland did with me.
It's a very highly emotional issue. So I could see how activists, people that are willing to actually make change could be disorganized possibly just because it's so highly emotional.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. And I have that with the volunteers here. Sometimes, yeah, they get too angry at the table, and I have to ask them not to volunteer for tabling. Maybe they can do work behind the scenes.
Yeah, because it would be really hard for certain people. In a 2022 symposium at Atlanta, Georgia, you had compared circumcision to dueling, slavery, and foot binding, and
Yeah.
traditions that had ended once people began to feel shame. What lessons from those examples can we apply to intactivism today?
Well, it was wonderful. The 1,000-year practice of foot binding was ended like in a couple of generations
Yeah,
because the Chinese began to interact with the rest of the world, and there was a source of shame about what they were doing to their girls and the way that their women's feet looked. Became a source of shame instead of a source of pride. So shame is a powerful motivator when it's used appropriately, is a powerful motivator for change. And the same thing with slavery, the same thing with racial discrimination, is that as we let the rest of the world gaze in on us, it becomes a source of shame that we would be tying a baby down and cutting off part of his penis.
Hi, it's Scott, interrupting the interview for a moment to tell you about Potts's e-commerce program. To use it, you get the links from what you want to buy on Amazon or eBay. Then you send them to Potts through X or Discord in a direct message or on order ideas on Discord. And Potts will post them in the comments on a YouTube video or in an X post. Then you follow those links that are connected to Potts's Amazon or eBay store, and you buy those items, and Potts will get a percentage of that sale. This funds Potts's expenses to promote the channel and contract with other intactivists. This does not cost you any extra money. All right, thank you, and back to the interview.
I've seen a few other interviews where you had talked extensively about it, and it actually was really an interesting concept, only because for so long, the intact body has been shamed. Here we are today, where we're mutilating thousands of children in the name of that shame. So it would be interesting to kind of flip it and turn that shame back on the people that are engaging in the practice and hopefully get them to stop.
Right. And my theory is there's a lot of people already feel shame about it based on their level of defensiveness about it. They already have these internal doubts about whether they really did the right thing. And so they cling to all the medical narratives about that it's healthier.
So Michigan still has one of the highest circumcision rates, despite decades of outreach, protests, and legislative testimony. What do you see as the main reasons for that, and what evidences show No Circum Michigan has made an impact despite these challenges?
I've tried to get the data. It's really hard now to get the statistics. They've really clamped down. You have to pay for it. We have not been successful in getting recent data. I think the data, most recent is like 2013, which is absurd. So I do need to focus more on ways of obtaining that data. The numbers aren't the only measure. I think it's important to understand that the messaging is getting out there so that the generational change. If I talk to a girl of 16, well, she's not going to have a baby, probably not next year, but within 10 to 15 years, she will. So I do believe in planting seeds, and that's not necessarily measurable, but it doesn't have to be because we're not in a profit-making business. If I speak to a mother and she comes back a couple of years later and said, yeah, you convinced me not to circumcise, I think that's the evidence that I need. I mean, that we did something right. Is that a great number of women that do that? No, but there are some. And so our messaging is on target. I think it's common sense that parents want to do what they know to be best. And if they don't know that circumcision is harmful, then they're innocently ignorant, that all we have to do is deliver the information, let them express their concerns or their doubts, and then investigate those with them. But to say that I have to have some annual survey of all of the mothers giving birth and what they've done, I don't really need that. That's not what's going to sustain us. What's going to sustain us is over the long term to be able to plant those seeds and know that, yeah, people do respond to information. It isn't a futile occurrence.
My understanding is Michigan is one of the worst states when it comes to circumcision, and maybe that has to do with, Kellogg, that's where he found it or something, but
yeah,
it's really good to know that you have an entire organization dedicated.
Exactly. And that's why I chose only from the very beginning to focus only on Michigan. And that's 95% of my work is only on Michigan. I'm not interested in going to other states or being a national organization.
You had mentioned Medicaid earlier, but I was wondering if, since Michigan continues to fund Medicaid and the national data shows that that's one of the strongest predictors for high rates, are there any obstacles preventing the policy change of particularly the Medicaid, especially now that the government is trying to cut back on Medicaid funding and stuff like that? Have you considered reaching out to maybe the Medicaid directors or anything and compelling them to at least drop the funding of it, only because it is, at the very least, an unnecessary thing for them to be covering?
This is a nice idea in theory. I tried this 20 years ago. I testified in front of the state subcommittees on the budget a few times. We've done letter writing campaigns. I visited the legislators and so on. There's a number of problems. First of all, Michigan's Medicaid is very generous. So they'll put you on Medicaid even if you don't apply for it. If you don't have health insurance, they're going to put you on Medicaid. And they've been very generous in the benefits as well. So they don't have to be limited to just what the federal government pays. They can also add to the program with the state funds. So I don't know of any major cuts at all to Medicaid. In addition, the annual Medicaid spend is just a tiny little fraction of the total budget. So I never got enough traction among legislators to say, well, you're going to save this, $3 million, $4 million a year. That's just little potatoes to them. They don't really care about that. So it was really hard to sell them on it when a lot of their constituents, as you said, wanted the circumcision because it's such a high rate. We also have the Jewish lobby that would have opposed that, even just on the basis of Medicaid, that they wouldn't welcome anything that might regulate circumcision, and this would be one of those things. So I did get a letter from a legislator that said exactly that his Jewish constituents would not put up with that.
That's interesting, considering any kind of Jewish ceremonies really have nothing to do with medical or Medicaid.
Yeah, we can make that argument all day long, but the problem is that it's an implicit criticism of a practice that the Jews do. So you are implicitly criticizing circumcision as perhaps not what was claimed to be.
Even if it was just framed as an unnecessary procedure, so therefore it doesn't villainize it necessarily, but just why fund procedures that are unnecessary?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we should not. But, and the Moyles, to add to all of this, the Moyles say, well, if a family is strapped for money, that they'll do it for free. So you have the Medicaid saying, well, it must be important to some Jewish families, although it shouldn't be done in the first day. It has to be done on the 8th day to be a Jewish ritual.
Right.
They would still try to cling to this, you're getting dangerously close to the religious practice. So people who don't want to do it don't have to do it. And that's what they would say.
I believe it's Connecticut or one of those eastern states in action has been trying to get them to stop the funding of Medicaid. And I believe that it was by one vote, it did not pass. And it was because of those claims about it would affect Jewish communities.
New Hampshire, I believe. Yeah. So you see how sensitive the issue is and politicized it is.
I mean, it's a shame, really. Just dropping Medicaid funding, that would potentially save a lot of children.
That was Norm's Part 2 interview. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section down below. I'm going to put all of Norm's links down in the description so you can go ahead and keep up with No Circ Michigan and what Norm is doing. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss Norm's final Part 3 interview next week. Please share and like this video to get this out to more people. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Bye.
Reboot the mission. No fear, no fiction. Truth in transmission. Prevail over the system. Our vision's the difference.